everyone, I'm Lilah McDonald, your host for NZ Business Magazine's podcast, Sustainably Ever After. Proudly brought to you by the Milford Foundation, a charity investing in local communities to build a stronger Aotearoa New Zealand. I'll be exploring the incredible world of sustainability and entrepreneurship. On this podcast, I'll be talking to guests who are making waves in the world of sustainability, those who have built businesses with a purpose, those striving to make their companies greener, and those leading the charge for social and environmental change. Welcome to Sustainably Ever After. I'm your host, Lilah McDonald, and today I'll be talking to Rui Peng, the founder of Critical, about how he developed the technology and process for turning plastic waste into construction panels called Cleanstone. The Milford Foundation, supporting education, youth and the environment to build a better tomorrow for all New Zealanders. Find out more at milfordfoundation.co.nz. New Zealand imports over 400,000 tonnes of new plastics and sends into landfill up to 330,000 tonnes of used plastics every year, which seemed like a wasted opportunity to Rui Peng. He founded Critical in 2013 to try and combat the massive amounts of waste produced by the construction industry. Rui grew up painting and drawing and found the art world exciting from a young age. He went to uni to study architecture, but quickly found the environment wasn't what he was expecting. A car accident and ruptured bowel helped him to realise there was a misalignment in his values. He wanted to spend his life serving others, and that's what led him to starting Critical. He worked hard, trying to develop a product that was strong, beautiful, and impactful. Rui put every hour he could into his idea and managed to raise around $500,000 to build the equipment and technology needed when something devastating happened.
The day after we set up, we got hit by the Papatui tornado. So without insurance, the tornado came and destroyed the factory. It ripped open the roof of a factory like a can opener, and it water damaged all our tools and it broke everything pretty much.
Welcome, Rui. Thank you for coming.
Kia ora, Lilah. It's awesome to be here. I'm so impressed at what you've put together, and this is awesome. So cool. Yeah.
Thank you. So, your parents immigrated here from China. What was it like growing up in an immigrant family?
Yeah, man, really good question to kick off the year, eh? I feel like my brain's still a little bit slow to get there, but I say that so my whānau, my parents, grew up in in the end of the Cultural Revolution over in China. So conditions were a little bit tough at the time for them. I think China was coming out of the end of a famine or something. And yeah, my whānau, they didn't have a lot growing up. And for that generation, education, the whole immigrant dream, get an education, do really well, get a good job, look after your own whānau, that's super important. But for some reason, my mum was convicted that many immigrants, for the better of their tamariki, for their kids, it's important that they leave China and find a better life for their kids. And yeah, so I think they had about $2,000 in their pocket when they arrived in Aotearoa, nothing, no connections, and just had to find their way, right? And so, in Te Ao Māori, there's a beautiful concept called tūranga waiwai, our place to stand, our place of belonging, the place that we feel safe. And for them, the culture shock was pretty massive, eh? And on top of that, being in the 90s where Aotearoa wasn't very favourable to immigrants, yeah, it came with a lot of hardships, I guess, for my parents. And, a lot of it was, my parents probably were we were all quite surprised that my parents had master's degrees, but they couldn't find work here because it wasn't recognised. So they had to restart and they had to work multiple jobs, restart again in the factories. And so my upbringing a part of it was seeing my parents face disadvantage and discrimination for who they were, who they are. And out of my mum's pain, out of love, she used to say to me, bro, you gotta stop hanging out with the Asians, go hang out with the white kids so that you can be a part of, the culture. And because of who you are, Rory, you got to run twice as fast for you to, get the same amount of opportunity as anyone else. And so as a kid, I had a lot of, through that, a lot of whakama with shame about being Chinese until my Māori mates brought me into tikanga, and through the concept of whakapapa, who we are today is where we're from. Te Ao Māori actually helped me to be a better Asian in many ways. They reconnect my whakapapa as well. And going back to sort of that story of my parents, like I wouldn't trade that experience, seeing my parents struggle and growing up with not a lot. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything else in the world, because in many ways it so taught me resilience, and it's a trait that in entrepreneurship is very important. This dogged perseverance, that you don't give up, that when things don't go according to plan, you don't give up. It's taught me empathy, empathy to care for those who have different, less privileges than me, growing up as well. Like, and how do I live a life in service of others? Yeah, so in many ways, like I really value my childhood, and I really valued the lessons, and my parents did their absolute best, and despite that we had very little, they worked really hard to make sure that us kids didn't have anything lesser than, some like our peers, that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of good lessons, I would say, and yeah, super grateful for it, to be honest.
Yeah, wow. It's amazing when you think about it. So you originally studied architecture. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I always grew up, loved art and loved painting and design. Like I remember I would have been 13 and we had this garage, like sort of in our house. And from 13, I would just hide myself out in the garage for 8 hours a day, just painting and drawing and doing stuff. So I've always loved it. And I had this really awesome art teacher in high school. His name is Mr. Woodward. And he was talking to me about living dangerously. And that, like, what the art world has done for me as a kid was like, yeah, there was almost this sense. It was exciting, it was a place where I can kind of delve into my own imagination. And architecture was, I remember as a kid sort of thinking, like, it's pretty cool, doing art. I can make a painting or I can do something, but it's always going to be fixed on flat, maybe on a wall, or, I mean, you could do an experience, but what was really exciting for me in architecture was you can create the experience around how the person would feel, in the houses that we design, the buildings that we design. So I got into architecture that way. I always loved doing art, sort of at school. Yeah, and that's how I kind of found myself, in that space.
So, I mean, obviously now you're not practicing architecture anymore. Was architecture your plan, though, for the rest of your life? How did you come to start Critical?
Yeah, that's a really good question, eh? So when I was 16, 17, I had two of my best mates, Andy and Chris. Like, they were quite philosophical. Like in our teenage years, they used to read books, read theological books, books about, like the story of God. What does justice look like in our world? Like, what does it look like for us to, live a life in service of others and to care for others and care for the planet and stuff. So I was fortunate enough to grow up with mates that were quite, I guess at quite a fairly young age, like we had a lot of these like deep discussions about what does it mean like for us to live and what does it mean? And so when I went to uni, I stepped into university thinking I was going to be sort of in the same place. Oh, this is going to be really exciting. I'm going to be in a place where I'm going to find brothers from other mothers and sisters from different misters. We're all going to care about how do we solve the biggest problems for us. And, it was climate change. It was the state of our environment. It was social equality, And so, but my experience in architecture school was very different, And it was a bit of a culture shock for me. Like I found myself in a culture, at least in my time that I went to uni, I found myself in a bit of a culture where like my peers it felt to me that they didn't really care about these bigger problems, but it was more about their personal success and personal careers. And the lectures around there was quite similar as well. So I found that really difficult. I love the creative work, but I found the culture really difficult. And I think it was in my second year, I ended up burning out. Like I remember I was probably I worked overnight, working when you're at architecture school, like working overnights was quite a common thing for architecture students. And it was this presentation that we had to do for a paper and we did it, but I fell asleep on the wheel and driving about 60 k's an hour, I hit a parked car. And yeah, it was insane. It was like the seatbelt ruptured my bowel, but I didn't know that at the time, and it snapped my collarbone. And so I was rushed into hospital. So I was 19, hit a parked car, I was rushed into hospital, and the hospital at the time didn't realize that I had a ruptured bowel. So they send me home. They're like, I'll put you on a sling, we'll send you home. And as I was walking out the hospital, nurses and doctors rushing to be like, no, we need to get you into surgery straight away because you got a ruptured bowel. And so they like, yeah. I don't know how graphic, but they like opened me up, took my guts out, and they like fixed it all up, put it back in. But it was one of those moments that, as a 19-year-old, it wasn't just that moment, but it was one of those moments where I realized that there was a misalignment in my values, I guess, and what I really cared about, and the place that I was at, and that I needed to take a year out and, kind of reconnect, maybe do some counseling, and find some people that had similar values. And luckily enough, I did, and that was sort of in my 20s, I found a group of friends. And yeah, we had these flats. We had these spare rooms in our flats, and we just, because my mates were teachers and youth workers and social workers, we invited people to come stay with us. And, I was a 20-year-old, and, a mate of mine, would meet someone like someone that was trying to come into prostitution on the streets and was sitting there begging, and he just invited them to come live with us because they needed a place to stay. And that began, I was 20, no idea what we were doing, but that began a 6-year journey, for example, of them, her and her partner being a part of their lives as they raised the kid themselves. And there was just so many stories like that, in my 20s. And that was hugely formational for me. Yeah, because it helped me to, I guess, clarify my purpose, which is, what does it look like for me to live a life in service of others? And there's a really beautiful reflection by this theologian called Frederick Buechner, and he talks about, the purpose of our lives is when we can find the intersection of what brings us the deepest joy, the things that we love to do that brings us the greatest level of happiness. The purpose of our lives is finding the intersection between what is when our deepest joy meet the world's deepest hunger. And so for me, it was, I love design and entrepreneurship and technology, and where I felt, I suppose, called to serve and in service of others was around, how do we give people opportunities and second chances? How do we care for our planet? And I guess that it was that journey, sort of doing architecture didn't quite work out in that sense. Found myself in this random situation, having spare rooms and supporting other people. That kind of led to critical. Yeah. So I did end up going back to uni and finishing my degree, and it was a 5-year degree. I worked for a firm for 10 months, and I was like, yeah, this isn't for me, But there was a lot of lessons that I've learned through doing architecture that is so helpful for me today. And so, yeah, I'd say, life isn't a linear path. I had this, in my last year of uni, you have to write a thesis, and I had a supervisor, and his name was Bernd Gunderman. He's this German, and he said to me, Rory, your life is not a highway. It's not a straight path from start to finish, but it's like winding up and climbing the mountain path. And he goes, when you climb a mountain path, sometimes it goes up, it goes around the mountain, and sometimes it digs down. Sometimes you enter into a clearing and you can see where you are with everything else. But other times you're in a dark wood and you feel like you're going down, you're actually not going up. But if you follow that path to where you feel, where your values are taking you, you will end up in your destination in that kind of a way. So I feel like that's kind of been, what it's been like. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So you knew your values. You knew you didn't want to do architecture. You founded Critical with Adam Ransfield. Yep.
It was first Andy. Yep. And then Adam.
Okay. So how did you meet? Did you know him from growing up?
Yeah. So Andy, I did. We started Critical together, and the first few years, it wasn't a business, man. It was, we knew we wanted to care for people. And yeah, we were just doing a whole bunch of experiments. So if you're in your 20s is the decade that you try a whole bunch of stuff, and you'll figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Yeah. So the first couple of years we were just, we were doing workshops and mentoring young people, doing all sorts of stuff, like building 3D printers and trying to turn that into a business, and it didn't quite work out the way we wanted to. But it was all around, these are our values, how do we live a life of service for others? And then it was 2018. So Andy then realized that his gifting was that he loved teaching, and he loved young people, and he loved for him, as through this journey, he realized that his way of service of others was actually through teaching. And now he's a principal of Wesley Primary School. And then right about sort of a similar time, we met sort of my now business partner, Adam, who we shared really similar values to. And it was 2018. We saw China stop buying the rest of the world's plastics. we saw the massive negative impact that both plastics and building materials and carbon emissions were creating in our construction sector. And that's when we then, in 2018, was when we then started focusing on how do we develop the new product and technology so that we can make building materials that are almost carbon neutral while taking plastics out of our whenua. So I guess that's how that journey got started with Critical, yeah.
Okay, so for the listeners, could you explain exactly what Critical is, what you do?
Yeah. So we are a clean tech company. We take plastics that typically can't be recycled, like fishing nets, and so there are 24 plastic types. Most of the Western world recycle 4 out of 24 plastic types. We take all that material. We've got a special technology that can take the hard-to-recycle plastics and turn them into what we call Cleanstone. Basically, in building, you use sheet material like plywood. You use it for your walls, you use it for your countertops, you use it for furniture. We turn Cleanstone as just a sheet material made out of 100% recycled plastics. But the cool thing about it is that it's beautiful. Like, it's really stunning, if I can say so myself. And it's really strong. Like, you can drive a truck over it. It's fully waterproof and it will last forever. It's almost carbon neutral. So there's like most building materials. So in construction, 20% of the building sector. So 20% of our carbon emissions is from the building sector, and 11% of our global carbon emissions is from building materials. So to have a building material like Cleanstone that is almost carbon neutral is pretty awesome.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's forever recyclable. So in the construction sector, it's the biggest contributor to waste to landfill. You might have a building like this, and the building might last forever, but the interior fit out of the building lasts only between 5 to 7 years. So every 5 to 7 years, someone will come, strip everything out, and biff it and build new again. And so it's hugely wasteful, and it's massive contributor to carbon emissions. So we thought if we can create a material like Cleanstone that every couple of years, if it reaches its end of life, you just return it back to us or recycle into a new panel, you can effectively have carbon and waste-free spaces, interiors. So that's what we do at Critical.
Ah, okay. So I want to talk about your process in a bit, but first going back again, How did you guys go about starting Critical? Did you have investors, and how did you build the machinery?
It's a really good question, eh? Like naivety. Like when you're young and naive, that there is power in being young and naive. Like, and if you think about all great companies like technology, they're all started with young and naive people. Like it took, so we started Critical in a spare room, and then we upgraded to the woodwork shop of an intermediate school in our local area. In the early days, like the technology that we needed to do to build this, we didn't know at the time, but we soon found out it didn't actually exist, and we actually have to create it and develop it ourselves. This would have been like sort of 2017, 2018 kind of a period. So we knew someone who knew someone else, and his name was Nick Bishop, and he was the sustainability at Fonterra. And they had this problem of milk bottles and should try and recycle them into more sustainable products, sustainable materials. So they approached us and said, hey, can you do something with this for us? And we pitched them the early idea of Cleanstone. If you send us the materials, we turn it into a panel, you'll buy it back off us, material back off us. And they said, yeah, sweet. I think it was like $12,000 or $15,000 contract. As soon as we did it, we realized we needed at least $250,000 worth of money to do the equipment. We didn't have that money. We didn't have no savings. We were just, poor 20-year-olds. And so we went on Google. We read scientific journals. We read instructions on how to do other machines. And we pieced together, through trial and error, the first version of that process ourselves. Turned the milk bottles into Cleanstone, sold it back to Fonterra. And we're like, maybe there's something in this. But yeah, it was. So in startup, they call it bootstrapping. So bootstrapping is, running on the smell of an oily rag. Between 2018 to 2022, we had no investors. Well, no, that's not true. We raised, the first 4 years was making sure that we can prove that the technology works. So I'll be working a full-time or part-time job, and then at nighttime, working another, 40 hours to make this work and to hustle and make it go. And then we raised, once we had enough confidence in the process and the tech, it wasn't perfect, and we had enough partners like corporates wanting to send us their materials, we turn them into plastics. We had enough customers. We raised a friends and family investment round. So we raised about $250,000 from friends and family. And then we raised another 250 just like through grants and little bits and pieces. Put all that money into setting up our first pilot facility, which is where we are right now in 2021. And we were really excited. We got custom machines. A lot of it, I wasn't being paid. When we could hire people, I wasn't the person that was paid, but it was our first employees. Once we set it all up, the day after we set up, we got hit by the Papatui tornado. So without insurance, the tornado came and destroyed the factory. Like it ripped open the roof of a factory like a can opener, and it water damaged all our tools and it broke everything pretty much. So we were devastated and had to then pull every favor we could find and we could have to rebuild the factory. And that was a hard process. It was really hard. That was a really hard process personally, and emotionally, because I was working part-time job, I had a family, and then had to, do this as well. But we were grateful, for the people who helped us in our community. And we launched in 2022 and we applied for the StartMate Accelerator. So StartMate is like New Zealand, Australia's top accelerator. And every year, 500 or 600 startups from New Zealand and Australia will apply, and they would choose 16 to invest in and then to incubate them through into a program. And we were the lucky one of the 16 to do that. And that set us off into a path of then raising $1.5 million worth of investment, growing out the team, growing out the tech, and then now looking at more expansion and growth now too. Yeah.
Wow. I just have a question. Why didn't you have insurance?
So when we were doing insurance, it was currently being negotiated at the time because the system is new.
Okay.
Yeah. And the insurance company is like, we're not sure what this classifies. Why don't we do an assessment? As the assessment was being done, this happened.
That's such bad luck.
Yeah, it's pretty dumb.
So in the time after that happened, I can tell it must have been really difficult for you and everyone. And a lot of people would have given up at that stage. What kept you going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, part of it, I'd attribute to, my upbringing. Being sort of a son of an immigrant family and seeing, I guess, the hardships my parents go through, there's a part of me that's kind of hardwired to not say no or to not take no for an answer. We started critical, not that we wanted to be rich and make a lot of money. We need to do that to solve a big problem. We started critical because we want to be good ancestors. We saw this massive issue in our construction space. We saw the massive issue of waste and carbon emissions and climate change, and we cared about that problem to want to solve it as well. So that was really important too. And I suppose the other thing that was really important keeping me going personally is it's probably faith as well, a rhythm and practice of praying, and we grew up in the Christian tradition, and we just had enough. I think I've seen enough in my life. Crazy circumstances that's happened to me and to our family that I can't explain, but a big part of it is probably an attribution to my faith and, a feeling that this is what I feel called to do. Yeah. So a combination of those three really kind of, puts in a perseverance. Now, mind you, it wasn't easy. A lot of tough days and evenings, I just wanted to cry, and it wasn't easy for sure. But yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know really. It's maybe the answer as well. A combination of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So for your process of actually turning the recycled plastics into, the panels, how does that work exactly? Where do you get your plastics from, and how does it work?
Yeah, we get it everywhere. So we get it from the curbside collection, your curbside, the recycling bin and everything else, all the stuff that goes there. We get it from our recycling infrastructure, other recyclers that take materials and process them. And we get it directly from businesses. So before it actually goes into the waste infrastructure, it can come to us. We get it from hospitals. We get it from everywhere, really, yeah. So plastics is everywhere. And there's no shortage, unfortunately. There's no shortage, yeah.
Have people been excited about your product and accepted it?
Yeah, they have, and we've been really grateful for that. I think a big part of it is, I think, timing has been really good. So when I was 24, and I was working in an architecture firm, I remember I was in charge of designing an airport building, and I was in charge of choosing the materials that would go into the fit out for the space. And I remember this was the mid-2010s, so 2014. I remember feeling so frustrated that I could either have a material that was beautiful, it was, tough, it was fit for purpose, and I could use it and the space would look fine, but it was imported, it had ingredients that I couldn't pronounce, that was probably toxic, they had chemicals and stuff into it that put inside it. At the end of life, it always just goes into landfill. And then I go, okay, well, like, what are my sustainable options? And there was just no options at the time, there was just no options for sustainable products. So I felt really frustrated. And the ones that were available, the sustainable materials that were available, was just like really ugly. It didn't serve the purpose of a designer. Like when you're a designer, you make decisions a few different ways, but quite oftentimes you make a decision based on how would this material look and make the space feel as the vision comes together. Then you'll probably think about how durable it is and how sustainable it is. And so to make something that is actually attractive and aesthetically pleasing is really important to be able to do that. Yeah, so that's how I guess, and it turns out that I wasn't the only person who felt that way as a designer or as an architect. And if you look at megatrends, so globally, Gen Z and millennials by 2035 will control over 50% of the global economy. So as a younger generation, like people like yourselves, I'm a lot older than you, I'm 35, be your dad. If I feel like my generation and the generation of my siblings, and you'll be Gen Alpha, I would assume, yeah. And Gen Alpha, for this next generation, we are a lot more in tune with how does a business or a product impact our planet. And because of that, that's where we will choose the companies that are doing better, doing good, and we will put money there. And so there's a shift that's happening, because I say if I was doing critical 10 years ago, I don't think the previous generation would have cared as much as what we, as this next wave of people. So timing's been on our side. Yeah. And we're super grateful for it too.
That's great. So do you sell to like architectural companies or also direct to consumer? How does it work?
Yeah. We sell to everyone. So people can just jump on criticaldesign.nz and get in touch and buy Cleanstone and use it for a fit out. Architects and designers specify us into projects, and ultimately it's the homeowner or the building owner or the business that pays for it through the builders. Yeah, and then we have partnerships with other businesses looking to make the operations take plastics and turn it into something more useful as well.
So when designers are creating new products using Cleanstone panels, is there anything different about working with recycled materials compared to regular?
It really depends. I would say yes and no. So Cleanstone is designed as a product that doesn't require that much. It's not that different. So you can work with it almost as closely as you can with a piece of timber as well. Now it is different and it has its own characteristics, but it's a little bit of learning, a little bit of training to get used to it as well. So it's not really it's not that different to how builders would cut and use and screw and everything else. So yeah, and we made it intentional that we wanted to do it that way to lower the barrier to entry. Yeah.
Why do you think that people haven't been using recycled materials as much as they should?
Yeah, that's a good question, eh? Well, I think the first one is aesthetics. Like when you're trying to decide how the space looks, you often think about how does the space fit into the brand or the experience of the people who uses it. Sustainability isn't it's becoming more and more so, but it hasn't traditionally been that's the reason why I'm going to choose that material made out of recycled materials. That said, the world is changing so fast. Like what's really hot right now is Green Star. So the New Zealand Green Building Council, for any government buildings or large commercial or businesses, they have a responsibility to climate and to waste. So that organisation themselves will have a strategy of zero waste or low carbon. And when they do new buildings, they have to now consider how does that then impact that strategy as well. So a lot of big organisations are leading the way in terms of creating Green Star buildings. And Green Star buildings is a series of criteria that asks you, if you get 6-star Green Star, that means your building is amazing. It always uses recycled materials. Energy is really low carbon, and everything is recyclable as well. So it's definitely more and more important in the last 5 years that I've seen than it was perhaps in the last 10 years. But again, going back, if you ever want to become an architect, chances are that you're really going to care about making a beautiful space that's also sustainable, and you'll be looking for recycled materials. So I think this next generation of designers is going to really change the game as well.
Yeah. So What do you hope to see in the future of architecture, like in the next generations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would envision buildings that would enhance our ecosystem, like buildings that are designed in a way that, like nature, can, not just like be carbon neutral, but be carbon negative. As new technologies grows, can buildings behave like trees and absorb carbons and become ecosystems for biodiversity as well? Yeah, I think that if we're looking at specifically at interiors, I think the future of interiors, like the way that we look at like build the inside of a building, it's going to be huge. It's going to trend towards circularity. So every element within a building will have a end of life pathway and a way to using the same materials for the first project will be for the second, third, all the way up to the 10th or forever project as well. So I do think that the future of buildings is going to be more and more, I guess, aligned with te taiao, with our natural world, and more healthy, but also more stunning and beautiful as well as technology and new materials come into the space. I'm pretty excited about that. I mean, that'll be pretty cool, to see. And there are some awesome examples of that happening around the world as well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that would be amazing. And what about the future of Critical? What are your goals?
Yeah. So the goal for Critical is that we will deploy our technology and put it into every city in the world and run it as a joint venture franchise. So with Critical, like being a Māori-owned business, there's been a lot of research that talks about how if you support the well-being of Indigenous communities, there's a lot of research that says that Indigenous community will actually also lift the well-being of the entire community around them as well. And so being a Māori-owned business, the way we want to grow is that we actually want to, in Aotearoa, partner with iwi so that they can co-own factories with us together as we grow and scale. And as we launch into new countries, as we put Critical factories into new cities, the first impact is that no country will ever have to ship their plastics around the world or send into landfill. Every city or every community or every region will have the ability to transform their own waste into high-value materials for a $950 billion construction materials market, which is huge. So we want to do it that way, and we also want to support the well-being of Indigenous communities around the world as well. So we want to offer Indigenous people, iwi-like organizations around the world, the first right of refusal to become commercial partners with us or joint venture partners with us as we launch in that city, as we launch in that country. Yeah, I just want to see I want to see building materials done differently. I want to see buildings, I think materials have the impact to be regenerative, that what traditionally is wasteful can actually help reverse the negative impacts of our planets. And we want to be a part of that too. So we're ambitious to be a global billion-dollar company because we have now less than 9 years now to make change to our planet before we do irreversible damage. Might even be less now, might be even 8 years. Yeah. So we need to scale and grow and make sure that we all play our part to care for te taiao. Yeah.
Yeah, so you talked in another interview about how you want your products to become the new normal in 10 years. What do you think needs to change in society for sustainable materials to be considered?
Yeah, so I think government legislation is always helpful because when you legislate that buildings have to be circular and not send anything into landfill, the industry will rapidly change. So there are really incredible, there are really awesome standards like the Green Building Council's Green Star. There's Home Star, the same ratings for school, but they're not they're incentives. They're not mandates. Now, if the government policy mandates if the government then incentivizes waste to landfill or carbon emissions in the built environment, we will see a drastic shift in how homeowners, building owners, designers, and architects and builders will go because it's just the right thing to do. I think that'll be a big part of it as well. I think I've always alluded to this, but I think the next generation of designers, this next wave of consumers who care about sustainability and putting their money on where their values are, that's huge in terms of getting us there as well. Yeah, but also I think it's just also as a company level for us, it's just about really caring for our customers who are designers and architects. How do we help them create really incredible projects that are also sustainable as well? So yeah, empathizing with their journey, making sure that what we're developing really helps and serves them and their projects and their personal goals as well. A combination of those things I think will be pretty cool.
As a Māori-owned company, you talk about being good ancestors for future generations. What do you want your legacy for them to be?
Yeah, man. Like, one of the beautiful things about Te Ao Māori is when you make decisions, you don't think 3 years ahead, you don't think 5 years ahead, you don't think 100 years ahead, but you think 1,000 years ahead. You know, like, what is the impact that we make today serve our grandkids, and their grandkids, serve our mokopuna, really, eh? And so being good ancestors is like, how does the decisions that we make to grow the business, to build the tech, and to make these products, how's that going to be beneficial to our mokopuna 1,000 years down the line? And so that's how we make our decisions. That's how we consider who we partner with and who we strategically partner with. We use that framework to think about how we make great products and stuff as well. So being good ancestors is actually just knowing that, you know, like the whole process, the whole concept of whakapapa, you know, who I am is the tracing back to my maunga, my awa, my whānau, my ancestors, my waka. And it actually goes, the concept of whakapapa actually goes all the way back to the land and to that rock. And it reminds us that we're actually from the natural world as well. And so we have kinship ties to Te Tai Ao. Therefore, it is everyone's responsibility. It is my responsibility to look after our whenua and our moana as well. So I guess it's a value that helps us steer decisions, strategic decisions. It's going to be, you know, we know that at some stage, as critical grows around the world, we will be making decisions that's going to be less profitable, but it's going to have high impact or higher returns. And we're ready to make those decisions once we get to that stage. So it's got quite a few different ways of how it impacts us specifically, but also why. Like, this is why we do what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an important way to think, and everybody should be thinking like that. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been so interesting, and it's so cool to see what you're doing, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. If listeners want to find out more about Critical, where can they look?
So, yep, you can follow us on Instagram. It's @critical.things. You can follow me on LinkedIn. We make daily videos. It's just my name, Rui, R-U-I, last name P-E-N-G. So follow us on our socials, jump on criticaldesign.nz. And yeah, if you're working on a project and you're looking for better materials, come and have a kōrero with us. We'd love to help.
Cool. Thanks again so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Lilah. This is so cool, eh? Yeah. Oh man, you're going to go far. If you're starting at 14, it's going to be awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thinking further ahead is something that I think we could all work on, because at the moment, around 40 to 50% of all waste going into New Zealand's landfills is from construction. 40 to 50%. We need to do better. Rui has created a much needed solution and is determined to make it the new normal around the world. If you want to find out more, go to criticaldesign.nz or follow them at critical.things. Thank you so much for listening. That was Rui Peng on Sustainably Ever After. A special thanks to sponsors of this podcast, the Milford Foundation, working to create a sustainable New Zealand for future generations. Learn more at milfordfoundation.co.nz. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and stay tuned to nzbusiness.co.nz for more details on upcoming episodes and bonus podcast material. Let's make our world more sustainable, one story at a time. See you soon!